Hey, what's going on, guys? OJ back here with another video, and today we're going to be talking about fighters who pull out of a lot of fights. I know that they're not trying to do this, and I know that a lot of us get upset whenever these fighters pull out, but I'm not here to vent about these fighters pulling out, rather just telling you guys the truth about certain fighters can't be reliable when it comes to actually coming to fight for the fans. So I'm gonna give you guys a set of fighters from the current UFC roster who either pull out of a lot of fights or are always reliable. So I'll have a set of tiers for you guys in a few seconds. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video. All right, starting off with the inspiration to this list, we got Paulo Costa. Man is a certified pullout merchant. Now, this guy is such a pullout merchant that even when he's not directly at fault for the fight being canceled, people will still blame him because they just assume that Paulo Costa has pulled out once more. Over his last 10 fights, he's had 6 fights canceled, and amongst those 6 fights, I guess like 4 of them, you could say that it's Paulo Costa's fault, whether he missed weight or just pulled out due to sickness or some kind of injury. Paulo Costa is notoriously known for pulling out of a lot of fights, and he's not exactly reliable to, secure a big main event or a co-main event of a pay-per-view or something along those lines. But either way, Paulo Costa, certified pull-out merchant in my eyes. Now up next, we got Armin Sarkarian, Armin Sarukian. Now, Armin Sarukian, contrary to popular belief, does not have an extensive history of pulling out of fights. The only fight he's pulled out of recently was against Islam Makhachev. The problem, however, is the way he pulled out of his fight with Islam Makhachev, which was basically trying to rizz up Nina Drama. And then once According to Armin Tsarukyan, he pulled out because he then strained his back. And I don't want to know why he strained his back because, like, unless he couldn't move at all, like, I don't want to hear it. Like, a lot of people, including myself, were hyped to see Islam Makhachev versus Armin Tsarukyan. And it's not just that he pulled out of his own will. 2 days later, he literally went on the Jackson podcast to explain why he had to pull out of his fight with Islam Makhachev. So that clearly shows that he's not deathly ill or like he can't just pull out, like he can't move at all. Like he was clearly able to move. It's just that I guess he had a little sore back or something along those lines. I think Armin Sarukian is very likely to pull out of his next fight because he's already shown that for his title fight. And plus, Armin Sarukian, unlike most of the guys here, does not need to fight in order to make a living. He's a rich Nepo baby, and although his skills are great, it's not like he needs to fight in order to survive. So I think Armin Sarukian, yeah, it's not like he has an extensive history of pulling out of fights, but again, if you book him to fight someone, he is likely to pull out in his next fight. Now up next, we got someone who pulls out frequently, Steve Garcia. Steve Garcia, I don't think he's pulled out of a lot of fights recently, but when he first entered the UFC, he had like 4 or 5 bouts canceled on him. And I think it was all because he either got injured or something due to illness. Either way, I think he's not at the level of a pull-out merchant because it's not like he's jeopardizing any main cards, but he does pull out of fights frequently. And while he does give us entertaining performances, I think it is concerning considering how often he stays injured. Now, moving on to someone like Shavkat Rakhmonov, who pulls out sometimes. Now, he's very inactive. I think that's a whole separate issue, though. But it's not like he pulls out of a lot of fights. The only fight he's pulled out recently was against his initial bout with Bilal Muhammad. Outside of that, Shavkat Rakhmonov just hasn't fought anyone. And yeah, he always does come in injured 2 fights, but it's not like he's pulled out until recently. And I do think this is gonna be more frequent now because Shavkat again, although I love him, I believe he's my future welterweight goat. He does get injured often, and I think that's gonna halt his activity. But again, I'm not gonna say that he pulls out frequently or anything along those lines because he's done that once recently. Now, moving on to someone who is always reliable, Mr. 4570 himself, Kevin Holland. This guy asks Dana White to fight every 3 months. Like, this guy always loves to fight. And I don't think he's pulled out in like forever, which is crazy considering his schedule. But I guess Kevin Holland just never gets injured. Now, maybe it's because Kevin Holland just comes in sometimes to get a paycheck or something along those lines. But I think Kevin Holland, like, for how active he is, I'm surprised that he hasn't pulled out even once. Like, if he pulled out once, I wouldn't even consider him someone who pulls out sometimes. Like, that's just how active he is, and it's kind of freakish to see Kevin Holland always fighting every like 3 or 4 months or so. But either way, Kevin Holland, uh, although his fights can be a little bit lackluster sometimes, he's always reliable to come and fight. Now moving on to another certified pullout merchant, we got Manel Cap. Listen, I love Manel Cap. I think he's very flashy. I think he's very fun to listen to on the mic, but I can't deny it. He's a pullout merchant. He's pulled out of a shit ton of fights recently, and I know it's not all of his fault. Like when Brandon Royval pulled out the first time, and when Davidson Figueiredo pulled out of their fight. But outside of that, Manel Cap has either missed weight or just pulled out due to foot fractures, like what happened at International Fight Week. And he's very unreliable to show up to high stakes fight. I think Manel Cap, yes, he's fun to watch. Yes, he's entertaining, but he complains about other people pulling out of their fights. Yet Manel Cap has been pulling out very frequently, and I think that is concerning. Now, moving on to Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, this guy, although he hasn't pulled out of that many fights recently, he has pulled out throughout his UFC career. Like he pulled out of his fight against Jack Shore, he pulled out of his fight against Corey Sandhagen the first time. Like I don't really rely on Umar Nurmagomedov to show up half the time. And say what you will about Umar Nurmagomedov's skills, it's the fact that the UFC is willingly trying to book him with better and better matchups when half the time Umar Nurmagomedov gets pulled out. Like there are fighters who pull out once or twice that get booted by Dana White. And yet because Umar Nurmagomedov has the Nurmagomedov last name, although he pulls out of nearly half of his fights, he always seems to be fighting upwards, which is not something I expect from someone who pulls out as frequently as Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, moving on to someone who pulls out frequently, we got Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker has been pulling out of fights a lot recently. He pulled out of his fight with Asmat Mirzakhanov, and he pulled out of his fight with Nikita Krylov, I believe. I'm not exactly too sure about that, but either way, Johnny Walker, he's pulled out of a lot of fights, and I think it's because he's been getting knocked out a lot recently. You know, Volkan Oezdemir knocked him out in the first round. Magomed Ankalaev knocked him out in the second round. Jamal Hill back in the day knocked him out. Like, I think that injuries are kind of adding up for Johnny Walker, and I do think this is going to be more frequent from now on. I can see Johnny Walker moving up to the likely to pull out tier, but it's not as frequent and it just started. So I'm just gonna put him at pull out frequently tier, but I can see Johnny Walker moving up from here. Now, moving on to someone who pulls out sometimes, we got Dricus Duplessis. I am so sick of people who claim that DDP is a pullout merchant. Like, there are guys out there on YouTube that claim that DDP is a pullout merchant just because he refused to fight Israel Adesanya on 5 weeks' notice, and how he refused to fight Adesanya again at UFC 300 when he just fought a 5 round war with Sean Strickland like 3 months ago. Like, I am so sick of, especially these Israel Adesanya fans. They just love to claim that DDP is a pull-up merchant, and especially Chimaev fans as well, which I'll get to later in this video. But either way, DDP, again, just look at his history. It's not like he pulls out of a lot of fights. Ever since he fought Brad Tavares, it's not. I don't see any gray marks on this on the Tapology whatsoever. And I think a lot of people are exaggerating the fact that DDP is a pullout merchant. And also, the cancel bouts at the bottom two, they're not his fault. It's usually his opponent pulling out of their fights. So I don't want to hear anyone in this channel claiming that DDP is a pullout merchant. And I thought to include him because I need to set the record straight on that. Now, moving on to someone who's always reliable, we got Diego Lopez. I don't think Diego Lopez has ever pulled out of a fight. And he's been dealt kind of a shitty hand. He's been asked to perform in a lot of short notice bouts. He's been asked to fight someone like the day of and weigh in like 3 times, like Dan Ige, who's also going to be on this list. But I think Diego Lopez, when you ask him to fight, he'll always fight. And he's always looking to fight someone. Hell, he's looking to fight Yair Rodriguez right now, but unfortunately, Yair Rodriguez wants to be a bitch ass, and he's like claiming that Diego Lopez doesn't deserve to fight him, whatever that means. But either way, if you want to see someone who's always reliable to fight and someone who's always going to put on a show, Diego Lopez is your guy, and that is why we love Diego Lopez. Now, moving on to another pullout merchant, we got Tagir Ulanbekov. Pulls out of a lot of fights, and I think the UFC has given him the boot for that. You know, he pulled out of his fight with Joshua Van due to missing weight. He pulled out of a lot of fights before. Like everything you see gray here, I think everything except one is because Tagir Ulanbekov pulled out due to either sickness or missing weight. But either way, Tagir Ulanbekov very unreliable to perform, and that's why the UFC keeps giving him guys that are like within the unranked areas, maybe like the bottom of the rankings. I do think Tagir Ulanbekov should get a jump up, but at the same time, like I kind of understand the UFC's position because again, Tagir Ulanbekov just pulled out of a shit ton of fights. Now, moving on to someone like Joel Alvarez. Listen, I like to watch Joel Alvarez. I think he can be very successful in the lightweight or welterweight division, but he pulls out of a lot of fights. And I think it's because he's been openly discussing about how hard the weight cut to lightweight is. And the fact that the UFC is kind of forcing him is why I'm not going to put him in the pull out merchant tier. But he does pull out of a lot of fights, whether it be injury, just, having trouble cutting the weight. Like, I don't rely on Joel Alvarez to really show up. But whenever I do see Joel Alvarez fight, I know it's gonna be fun because I'm waiting for like a first or second round finish. Now moving on, we got Mike Davis. This guy pulls out of a lot of fights, and he doesn't fight all that often. I don't know how those two possibilities can ever come together, but here's Mike Davis doing that. Now the only reason I'm not putting him up higher is because he's not jeopardizing cards, but especially during his featherweight stunt, I think he's been pulling out a lot of his fights. And he's been doing that less recently, but that's because he's not fighting at all. And Mike Davis, again, he's good, but I think especially in this Feresian fight, he just looked very slow and sluggish and rusty. And all the pulling out and just the inactivity in general is kind of adding up to Mike Davis's career. And although he's not pulling out though, it's hard to tell whether or not Mike Davis is gonna fight anytime soon. Now moving on to someone who sometimes pulls out of a fights, we got Curtis Blades. Curtis Blades pulled out the second time, I mean, when he was supposed to fight Riz Van Kuniev. Now he's fighting Riz Van Kuniev this week, but he does pull out sometimes. It's not just Riz Van Kuniev. He's pulled out of his fight with Alexander Volkov initially. I know that fight happened after, but it he does pull out. And although Curtis Blades usually performs, it is something to note because Curtis Blades, it's not like he has a perfect track record. He does get injured from time to time, and he's not completely reliable, but still, he's nothing like the guys above. Now up next, we got Joshua Van. Joshua Van is always reliable. Hell, he took a fight on 3 weeks' notice against Brandon Royval. That is why Joshua Van is the flyweight GOAT. But Joshua Van, I don't think he's ever pulled out of a fight. And he's had a lot of fights in the UFC right now. It's like over like what 10 fights so far, and not one time did he pull out due to an injury. I think Joshua Van is very active. He's always reliable to put on the fun scrap, even when he loses. And I think Joshua Van, due to the activity alone, is why I believe he'll be at least a top five contender within the near future. Now, moving on, Macy Barber. Now, Macy Barber, and I'm not just going to say this because of what happened in her last fight, where she literally pulled out 5 seconds before the fight even started, but I think Macy Barber is a pullout merchant. This is not the first time a bout with Macy Barber got canceled because Barber got sick or ill or like injured. Like she pulled out of her first scheduled bout with Aaron Blanchfield, and she also pulled out of her fight with Rose Namajunas, I believe. Like Macy Barber, very unreliable to show up to fight. At this point, I don't know why Macy Barber's fighting. It's been like 2 years since Macy Barber's been in the octagon, and it's not like fans are really missing her. There's nothing really to like about Macy Barber whenever she's fighting because she's gonna pull out half the time, and even when she is staying there, it's not like it's must see TV. So yeah, I'm just gonna put her in the pull out merchant here and leave it at that. Now up next, we got someone who is very likely to pull out Hamza Chimaev. This guy pulled out of his fight with Robert Whitaker initially because he got the snuffles 1 week into the fight. And Hamza Chimaev, it's not like he's done that once. I think since COVID, Hamza Chimaev has been pulling out very frequently due to just being sick. I mean, this guy, he can be the most dangerous fighter in the world, but his immune system is that of a 5-year-old child with pneumonia. And I think Hamza Chimaev, he's very unreliable. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow they announced that Nasruddin Imavov's going to be the backup to Hamza Chimaev versus DDP because Chimaev pulled out. I think he's been doing this better, but at the same time, Hamza Chimaev, I don't rely on him to fight. He used to be very active, which is why I'm not gonna put him at the pull-out merchant here. But at this stage of his career, it's clear that Hamza Chimaev is not gonna be all that active, and he's not very reliable when it comes to booking fights. Now, moving on, we got Ronnie Yaya. Ronnie Yaya pulls out arguably more than Hamza Chimaev and Macy Barber. But the reason I put him at the frequently tier is because Yaya is not damaging any sort of fight card. You know, he's usually fighting the unranked section of the bantamweight division, and yeah, he does pull out of nearly half of his fights. But at the same time, Yaya, it's not like he's all that must see TV. It's not like fans are anticipating for the next Ronnie Yaya fight. Well, half the people like myself are wondering how Ronnie Yaya is still on the roster in 2025. But I think Ronnie Yaya, uh, he usually pulls out due to injury, and it's not like it's been a one time offense. Like you could just look at his match history and Tapology, and you can find that Ronnie Yaya is a notorious pull-out merchant. But the reason I'm not going to call him a pull-out merchant directly is because he's not jeopardizing any of the big fights on a fight card. Now, moving on to someone who sometimes pulls out of their fights, we got Azat Maxim. Now, Azat Maxim has pulled out of 2 out of his last 4 fights, but the only reason I'm going to put him at the sometimes pulls out tier is because he's only scheduled for 4 fights within the UFC. And also, he's fighting Tagir Ulanbekov on short notice. I'm surprised that Tagir hasn't pulled out due to missing weight or anything like that. But either way, as I Maxim, he does pulls out of fights, but his career is relatively new. Just due to the inactivity and also the lack of fights he has on his belt, despite having a 17-1 record. So I think as I Maxim, he's very. I don't know what's gonna be. I could definitely see him on the likely to pull out tier at minimum, but he's an unranked flyweight, usually fighting on the prelims, and he's not, pulling out of any high stakes fight on the main cards or anything like that. So I'm just gonna say, as I Maxim, maybe he's healthy now, maybe he stops pulling out, and but he does pulls out sometimes, and I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls out in any of his future fights. And now, last but not least, we got Dan Ige. Dan Ige is the polar opposite to what a pull-out merchant means. Dan Ige will fight you on 3 hours notice. He did that against Diego Lopez after Brian Ortega pulled out due to sickness. I think Dan Ige, if you need a fight booked, Dan Ige is your man. In the featherweight division, I don't think Dan Ige's ever pulled out. I don't know, I might be lying about that, but if like, the point is Danny Gay's always active, he's always looking to scrap, and he's fun to watch. So I really like Danny Gay. I really appreciate Danny Gay, and hopefully, Danny Gay can continue this streak where he just accepts fights and not pull out due to injury. All right, that's gonna be it for today's video. Leave a comment down below who I missed that may be considered a pullout merchant or not. But other than that, uh, leave a like and a comment about what video you want to see me make next. Like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.